Ladies and gents, this is ML's Like Teen Spirit. Today I've got James with me. James, welcome.
Hi, John. Thanks for having me. Pleased to
Good.
be
Thanks for
here.
joining. Thank you for the support. James, it's your first interview with me. You better introduce yourself. So can you take 60 seconds or 90 seconds? Tell everyone who you are and what you've been doing, please.
All right, I'll try to be quick, but nice to be here, John. So yeah, James Miller. I have been in data for almost my entire career. So I'm getting old now. So we're talking more than 25 years in data leadership. So over that time, I started in analytics and insight, and we're going to talk about insight today. So I'm excited about that. My early days as an insight analyst in retail. Over that time, I've kind of been in different places as a consultant, as a chief data officer, analytics and data leader. Spent a long time at Experian, and have been a sort of CDO in various guises in different organizations. And in recent years, have been more focused and working in smaller organizations, kind of data strategy startups and scale ups. And my current role is Director of Data and Digital Transformation at a data strategy company called Ambit, which is all focused on data economics and data asset management and how do we prioritize our data as an asset in complex organizations. So lots of exciting stuff. So yeah, I've been at this for a long time, and it's very much my pet subject, John.
Good news. Well, look, you've given a nod to our subject today. So you were you're an insight analyst back in the day, and I was too, James. So this is where I started my career, and this conversation came from, I think, a written piece of yours, which caught my
Yeah.
attention because it's something I've been thinking about. I'm going to allow you to introduce it, but I wanted someone to come on and talk about insights, how they're used, what are they, and what might be about to happen in the insight space. So could you introduce the topic and then we'll just dive into it?
Yeah. So I wrote a piece. I've got a Substack. I wrote a piece earlier last year about insights at scale, and by that, AI insights at scale. I mean, how can we not have a conversation when we talk about AI, John? But I mean, I've insights creation and delivery have been part of my career since day one. It's one of the parts of working in data I love the most. Is how do we create an insight that changes our business for the better, right? I've always loved that. And from a retail background originally, it's all about that. Great insights lead to great decisions and all the rest of it. But where this comes from is that I was attended a number of conferences last year, like a lot of people, and AI being kind of key to the discussion, as they are in most of these conferences these days. And a phrase that kind of raised my hackles a little bit, I've got to be honest to you, that I heard was AI insights at scale, as a kind of unequivocal benefit of AI. The fact that we have a higher velocity, greater volume of insights at our fingertips than ever. And who wouldn't want that? Now, me being the slightly probably cynical character I am now, I was like, well, yeah, I kind of like that idea, but I'm not sure every or many organization set up to necessarily absorb insights at scale at that velocity, because there's an awful lot that we need to do to make sure that we can really wrangle insights and make use of them. So that's where this comes from. That's what kind of piqued my interest originally and what got me writing about this subject.
Good. Well, it caught my attention as well. So I read the piece and got the vision of like the promise would be someone is sitting at their desk and the ticker is like, triggering away, or something's rattling next to the alarm is going off every 15 seconds to say,
Yeah.
hey, it's something new to look at. And my reflections on it was that in working life, it's always was difficult for people to act
Yeah.
on insights for reasons we'll discuss. So you called this a paradox, to kind of say, well, there's this kind of, I don't know, just this point where it could be that there is already too much. There's already an abundance of insight that folks struggle to act on. So how is it going to be any better? When AI
Yeah.
helps us see this more and more. So let's do the definitions of it, James, because you're
Mm.
half in there. So an insight would be what makes your business better. Help us with a bit of definition, just
Yeah.
like
Yeah. I mean,
if you had to tell, I don't know, a granny on the street what an insight is and what we do with it, what would you say?
yeah, no, it's a great question. And actually, weirdly enough, it's something that I've thought about for my entire career. And I think there's a lot of things, especially in the area we work in data, A lot of definitions get argued over, and there's not necessarily broad agreement. So I kind of tend to go for a more straightforward definition, as you say, that maybe the granny in the street would understand. But for me, an insight is a change in perspective, right? And there's a difference. So what we deal with in data a lot, we deal with observations, don't we? We see observations the whole time. We see that our sales have gone up, for example. That's an observation. Fine. See that, but it doesn't tell us very much, right? It doesn't tell us why and what we might do with that information. So for me, an insight is really a change in perspective that leads us to a different course of action, right? And if I want to be really simplistic about it, for me, it's an aha moment. It's like, aha, literally that's the way I've seen it as. It's that moment where I'm saying that gold nugget that I've just taken from a piece of analysis is going to change the way we think about something. And that means like we can change the decision or the path that we're taking about whatever customer experience or whatever we might be working with at the time. And that's as simple as I put it, really. And I think analytics is not insights, right? Data is not insight. It needs to be created. I often talk about it, as I said, between observations and insights. And if we were kind of panning for gold in a stream, like in the old wild, the Wild West, in that substrate, the rocks and the muck and the dirt, or just the observations is what we see. That little gold nugget is that insight you take from it, because that insight is going to change your life potentially, right? That gold nugget.
Got it. So James, I'm in marketing. So are you saying people looking at their website performance, or people looking at marketing campaigns and making tweaks, are they just doing experimentation and optimization, but they're not really utilizing insights particularly? What's the distinction there?
Arguably so. I think for me, you need to be doing something different. For me, there's a high bar on insights. And I think the reason for that is just kind of hard won, because as an analyst back in the day, I wanted to show my business everything, right? This is how we're performing. This is what's going on. Most of that is noise. People going, okay, great. The business is running. We're selling stuff. The website's running. People are looking at the website. Fantastic. For me, an insight is, as I said, is something that is there's a high bar for, because we can say, in actual fact, this particular set of observations is going to lead us to a different decision. It's going to make a change. And the reason I put a high bar on it is because otherwise everything feels like it's an insight, right? And I think we always risk fatiguing our stakeholders with everything. So I think when we were talking before, I think, John, before this session, we talked about there's a difference between global insights and local insights. And I think local insights are actually really the things that we're doing, with CRM tactics, or UX stuff, or kind of website stuff, and what have you. And I'm not doing that down. That's the kind of stuff that in many ways can face a bit of automation, right? That's kind of day job stuff. It's important that we understand what's going on. And some of those insights, we might see that, with our CRM tactics, for example, there are things that we need to act on, and that's a real insight that's going to change our approach. And then there's the global insights, aren't there? And the global insights are the big strategic nuggets, the things that the entire enterprise needs to care about. There's a change in the way our competitors are behaving, or the market has changed rapidly, or there's something that's almost existential to us. So I think there's different definitions that we need to take on board. And the thing that I'm always wary of is just making sure that we do make something of a distinction between kind of everyday observations and analytics, and real core, real fascinating insights that are going to make a change. Because the more we throw at a business, the more that fatigues. And we've got to be very selective on what we as kind of data professionals bring up for, escalate for change.
Good. Well, I think what we could do here is, I know you've got a good example of this. It's one of your favorites, and actually I do too. So I think we could have a go at sharing like these two cases that we've got, and then maybe we can move on to just like what would have been behind those decisions being made in the first place. How was it decided that these two things should happen? So because I love the sound of my own voice, I'll go first, James. So it's almost one of the only kind of huge insights I saw acted on. And it was at travelsupermarket.com. I was working in the Money Supermarket group. And this actually came from research. So like literally focus group is where it began. So 12 people sat around was the beginnings of this. But the insight was that for many families, the female head of home was responsible for holiday planning. So, the fellas were kind of, I don't know what, either interested or passive in the process or informed. But it was the wives and mothers that would take charge of like, where are we going as a family? But the key trigger was that they did this as a New Year's resolution. It almost was like women head of households came straight out the gate 1st of January and began planning this so that it would fit around family finances, school time, and so on. And so this insight meant that Travel Supermarket moved all their brand activity, which was multi-millions of ad spend, into January, targeting that persona, when what the typical thing they would have done is kind of like, we kind of wait till Easter, till underlying demand for holidays starts to pick up. We will begin running our advertising there. But pulling that all the way forward, addressing the right persona, came from this focus group insight of like, it was men and women, but the women in there were going like, hey, this is my job. This is something I have to take care of in January. And it just wasn't heard of up to that point. So this is the big one that I saw. So mine was from the travel industry. You said earlier you're from retail. Why don't you introduce your case?
Yeah, I mean, I've seen. I will do, and I'll tell you why I chose one particularly, because it just made me laugh at the time, to be honest with you, more than anything, because it was a fantastic example of creating insight in. I'm telling you, it's about 15 and 20 minutes worth of work, which made a significant amount of money. And this doesn't always, these are quite infrequent. But I mean, I've seen lots of insights appear in my work in different industries, retail and what have you, that really make a huge difference. But a lot of that is kind of big strategic pieces that we've been working on for absolutely ages. And, and there's an iteration of insights, and we kind of change the ship of a business, they turn the ship around and what have you. This one particularly I love because it just shows you what can be done quite crudely and quite quickly by a couple of good data scientists, really. So this is a number of years ago, and I was working at a consultancy when we focus on data science work for retailers, and we're working one of the big health retailers. And one of the key challenges was, how do we get more of a certain demographic through the doors? Right. And this was, you kind of almost, you're wealthier. I'm going to be a bit kind of stereotypical, kind of yoga loving individuals who weren't necessarily fantastically great customers, because, this is sort of a high street brand, but they want to see more of them in. So we were kind of having a little noodle around with, well, what are these people buying, right? What's this particular segment going for? And that, we've got all the customer data in front of us. And I remember sitting there with the chief data scientist looking at it. Was like the Matrix, right? This guy was incredible. So you're looking at all this kind of customer data, all this transactional data. And what appeared in here, when you do a little bit of sorting, we found there was a certain product, which was what I call a keystone product. So it's the sort of thing that if it's in the basket, it correlates with higher spend. It correlates with a kind of a greater vibe amongst the customer to kind of buy more exciting stuff in store. And you do see them occasionally. Now, this one was something called watermelon seeds. And that made me laugh at the time, because I'm better now. I wasn't particularly healthy at that point. I have no idea what watermelon seeds were. I mean, I can guess, right? I know I was surprised that anyone actually ate them, but there you go. But this little quite innocuous product, never heard of in my life, we found that it was a keystone product in the basket. And if that was in the basket, we were more likely that it was certainly associated with this particular key segment we want to see more of. And they were buying more products. They were buying more of the products we want them to buy at a higher margin. Now, this wasn't a particularly high margin product in itself. It's very innocuous. No one was very interested in it. But it can be flying under the radar. And, 50 minutes work, we looked at it and said to the client, well, you know what? if we look at all the catchment areas of your stores, we can see where there's higher numbers of these people. Let's put this in another 100, 150 stores, and they can do that pretty much overnight. Lots of, take out a distribution center, not going to cost them a lot of money. They did that, and more or less not quite overnight, but the first quarter they make another £2 million straight up each quarter off the basis of that one insight. So it's a little 15-minute insight. And the reason why I love that one is because it's just so basic, right? Low effort, high reward. And I think one of the other reasons that this one came to mind when I was thinking about kind of insights at scale was saying this was about 6 years ago. So we weren't in a position that AI was throwing us lots of insights, right? It was very much more manual. But I do wonder if I had 100, 150 kind of signals thrown at me or thrown at the team about different things going on, and I have to follow the rabbit down different holes, would we have come to make that decision so fast and so impactfully, or would perhaps we've got a bit gridlocked? Right. And
gotcha. So it's a novel finding, mandated with, can you find something that will have these target consumers? So some of the good context was wrapped around it, that meant you were then able to just move forward with it. I suppose you're saying you become desensitized to some of this. If you're having 100 insights a day to shuffle through, you may not know what to do. And after a year of this, you'd be just bored of looking at your insights outputs and not care about it at all. So the novelty factor of like trying to do something will be lost.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, who knows? There could well have been more lucrative and better insights for us to find at that time within the data, right? You don't know. There's an opportunity cost to all of this, right? There are other things trade-offs to be made. And AI potentially can help us with some of those trade-offs if the signals are right. But what makes me worry is that most organizations aren't necessarily set up to absorb that insight, as you said, at that scale. So in that kind of scenario, we were in a very small organization. We could not cope with hundreds of signals coming our way and hundreds of kind of, paths or threads to pull. And can you imagine that, if you got 100 insights, each of them requires a meeting to decide whether we should do something with it, because the human in the loop is still very important. We're not letting the AI run our businesses completely, right? So it wouldn't be manageable. So that's why I find it fascinating.
Well, let's move on to the decision side, because I was listening very carefully to some of the words you used around the watermelon seeds. And it was kind of things like, there was a target consumer. This one product was an interesting product, but not like high value or anything, but correlated with some higher spend pattern. There was 100 other stores. It will be cheap to roll out. So this sounds like a big daisy chain of factors that were kind of like there to build this decision off of. Could you zoom in on some of it? Like what? So when you were presented with this, like what did you have to pull together to persuade someone to do this? Like what was the calculation? Just like what can others be thinking of? So if they see an insight tomorrow, well, hopefully they won't, because actually we're recording this on a Friday, so it would mean they're working.
You never know.
On their next working day, when someone is presented with something a bit insightful, what are the collection of things they need to be thinking about to decide whether they take this to their boss?
Yeah, it's a really good question, and I think certainly I would always say that you need to have a clear business goal, right, associated with this. And this is a classic. We always say this in data, right? We should not be messing around with data, really, unless there's a good reason to do that. Now, I'm not actually a firm believer in that, because I do like a bit of experimentation. I do like a bit of serendipity and discovery when it comes to, and we should build that into our processes. But largely, we need to make sure that we are allocating our time and effort on the right things. Right. And that's where the business, what does the business care about in the strategy? Now, in the case I raised there, this came from actually a very high level business goal, which was a certain wealthier, healthier, if you want to call it that, segment. We want to see more of them. We want more of their wallet. That is key to grow the business. Right. And that at least allowed the direction, right, that we were in the right place. So fundamentally, yes, I mean, that, I think what I'm saying is pretty obvious, the fact that we've got to make sure that our insight efforts and initiatives are focused on our strategic goals and the kind of KPIs that we're on the hook to deal with. And the reason I say it's, one, it's obvious, and two, we have stakeholders on the end of this who are actually those that will make the final decision. So it wasn't me that made the decision to stock watermelon seeds in 150 stores. There is a trading director, there's a commercial director that has to take our analysis and go, I believe it, and I'm going to do something with that. Now, they are on the hook. Their motivation and their incentive is to increase the basket spend of that particular customer type, right? So it's very obvious, but I don't think Rory is necessarily particularly good at that. We can get quite in insights, can get quite exciting. We can go off in little tangents and what have you. So I think that's the first thing. It's just making sure that it's focused on business outcomes. But I actually think in a kind of a wider point here, and this is probably coming more to my point in terms of, are our businesses able to absorb kind of insights at scale, that there's a kind of decision-making infrastructure or architecture that we need to think about in organizations to be able to make sure that we can kind of activate on insights more effectively. And I think some of that, as I mentioned before, is about just ensuring that we've got everything focused on business outcomes, as I said. But there are other elements to this. Have we got the empowered teams? Have we got empowered teams to go and look at the right things? Is the right escalation path in place? So if we find something, is that then routed through to the actual decision makers? And do those decision makers know why you're asking them to make it to use your insight, right? And that's all about us working to the same plan in an organization. It's about cross-functional teams understanding each other and working together properly. I think there's elements of kind of decision rights and decision ownership that need to be considered as well. So one of my great frustrations, I think, as an early years analyst, was I created loads of insights, but I couldn't find anyone to act on them or care about them. Not all of them, some of them, yes. But funnily enough, my early work was in kind of store analytics. So where do we put new stores? Now, if it was related to a project that someone cared about, yes, someone would pay attention. But in order for me to understand that, I had to, as a data professional, really kind of embed myself and understand the business stakeholder implicitly really, really well. So there's a whole infrastructure that needs to be built and put in place that allows us to kind of absorb insights and do something with them, I think.
So what are we really saying here? Are we saying that, because what I was picking up from what you said is there's so much consensus required sometimes, and working with other groups to activate ideas and so on and so forth. Are we really saying that to kind of break through on this, it's like what CEO mandated, that we need to operate in this way if we're going to grow or innovate? Otherwise, if it's anything other than that, that team over there is doing their BAU. Trading are just caring about what happened yesterday. The data guys are coming up with new things. Is it just going to be always spinning the wheels, or is there any other? I don't know. What's the way through, James?
What's the way through? Well, the way through is mandated from the top, in my experience, in a good organisation. Kind of clear the path for this. So there needs to be a clear, as ever, an absolutely clear link between what the data and insight teams are doing and the business requires, right? And certain job of the exec is to clear that path. So some of it is mandated. Some of it's about ensuring that teams aren't completely slammed the whole time. They're unprepared. They're not working to clear plans, ensuring they're not heavily siloed, right? Making sure that, I'm a huge fan of cross-functional teams, and, it would be kind of hub and spoke models, whatever you want to call these sort of things. But I'm a huge fan of the fact that, I honestly hate to see analytics folks and insight folks kind of centralized. I like to see them embedded in the business, right? So there's ways you structure the business. So your kind of insight engine, your insight people I kind of, your left-hand person or right-hand person, or whatever you want to say, to your decision maker, right? They need to be there with them, living the business problems, right? Not in an ivory tower somewhere. And still, some organizations tend to put their kind of folks in back rooms. So a lot of this comes around with kind of how you develop the organization, how you run it. I think there's wider things here around, what one of my original worries around all of these kind of insights coming to high velocity was like, essentially, what's our organizational capacity to actually execute those insights, right? And I think everything I described there is important about how we structure our teams. How do we ensure they're focused on the right things? They're not, data teams aren't service ticket takers. They're actually part of the business. But it comes down to things like thinking about skills and capability gaps. So, how good are our people in general at kind of sizing the opportunities from the outset? Because so when we set on the path and we go, look, I need to make a decision, you do need to start early days thinking about, well, what's potentially the size of the prize of this decision. So if something changes, if I'm investigating watermelon seeds, for example, I need to roughly know the order of magnitude in terms of the impact that might have on my business, right? And that's just basic business skills. There's an element of being able to forecast forward, element of being able to kind of think about the business side, not get too wrapped up in the numbers. So I think there's some, and that kind of decision-making skills and kind of basic business skills and commerciality goes both ways for data people and for our kind of, the rest of the business, right? We all need to be working to the same plan, I think.
On the org side, I've got an example, James, that I've dusted off from my memories.
Yeah.
Kind of captures some of the decision-making authority with enablement, with like who can approve an insight. So I can tell you, in the noughties, I was back at RSA Group, which was an insurance brand, and in those days we would have multi-channel marketing going on, and one of them was telemarketing, still like calling customers around renewal time and some of these things. But it was in this period where quote and buy on the web was growing, showing my age now. Quote and buy on web was invented, and aggregators like such as Money Supermarket and these big players, began to create a load of swirl in the customer base. So historically, it was more like a subscription where it's an insurance contract, and customers began to churn and move much more frequently, and they would create all these data points. But something I did back in those days, I was responsible for telemarketing channel and direct marketing and all that stuff. We were beginning to get all these new data points, and we came up with a thing on our team, and we just call it like, we want to run a test lab. And we came up with this pitch to management, say, we want to run a test lab. What it means is we want to use telemarketing channel to contact customers based on these array of triggers that are suddenly being created. We do not know if the customers will tell us to get lost or have a conversation with us or change their mind somehow. We would like to do this for a period, and what we promise, this is the case. Roughly 10% of our existing base are kind of showing some of these behaviours. We want to run a test lab. We want to take a team from one of the contact centres to do it. We believe it will take us 6 months, but what we promise to do is every month we'll just come and tell you what we did. And I always remember this case because we kind of created at least some sort of like ring fencing as part of it, so it de-risked it. This is what I always really remember, is they felt like, it's something happening on the side, but they've pitched it well. It doesn't seem like large enough at this point that it would disrupt our core. But they're promising to come and tell us in a meeting. And actually, it just seems quite exciting. So there was some of those things. So at the time, I was just like young and hungry and wanted to use data for everything. But I'm not sure if I'm recommending people do it necessarily, but it's just as a way of like, hey, if you don't consume insights today, sometimes there's like just other ways to put this together. I suppose it's these days it's like agile squad, like, hey, we're like executing all this stuff. There's different names for this, but the fact that management were like, John, this sounds great. Please come and tell us. We had the meetings. They were able to decide whether they liked some of these things, or they helped us understand whether they felt it was impactful enough. So it was like a live theatre. We all participated in deciding. And I suppose I could finish this by just saying like the relationships with the people were just way stronger. They trusted us to tell the truth. We were super excited because we got to speak to the directors. And some of this helped us get through. But the very first key part was calling it the test lab, because they could see straight away. They could see straight away that it was not a long-term commitment requiring investment. The lab is a bit wacky and scientific, so a bit exciting. But the test, and like it's for a defined period of time. We want to try this. I think we wouldn't have started that if we just said, guess what, we want to have 500 different new marketing campaigns, and we don't know if it will work. Like, we would have got shot down.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I love that example, and I think I've definitely got examples like that actually in my background, where you've almost created a panel. Sounds a bit official, but there's something to be said for it. A kind of a panel of people on certain insights and certain themes who come together to discuss the story, right? And we're saying, and that is a place where your insight and your data people are there with the business, and we're working to the same mission. We're discussing the same business story. We're bringing our insights to that. The gut feel and the experience and the kind of the knowledge that your kind of business stakeholders have all the time is brought at the same time. And you do bring the two together. And sometimes you'll go, do you know what? Our data might tell us this, but you know what? 20 years of experience tells me something else. And that's fine, because someone's got to make that decision. I never had a problem with that at all. I had it in my early career, because when I was, my first insight job was as a site location analyst. And I was the only, actually, weirdly, I was pretty much the only analyst in the entire retail organization. It was that long ago. But my job was to kind of create the insights as to where should we open shops, right? How much will those shops do in terms of business, blah, 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 all that kind of stuff. It's great old fashioned kind of location planning stuff. But I had a standing invite to the board, as I was about 23 years old, a standing invite to the board once a month, and I'd come along with all my stuff and with some of my mates, and we would then tell the story of the insights that we understand about how our customers are shopping, how our stores are doing, and what we think that means. And it was, what was really grounding for me was that I had very experienced people listening to me and going, okay, that's interesting. You've seen that signal. I think that's what this means. So you brought a mixture of kind of like what for me was just what in reality I was just translating numbers really and patterns, right? But you brought that together with the people that have kind of got real kind of insight in the sense that it learned and experiential insight in the sense that they've kind of lived this and seen the patterns in their own heads. And you bring that together. And as I said before, what you actually do, if it's done well, you create a kind of almost a psychologically safe space to actually discuss these insights and go, okay, to your lab concept, we might take this one and we might do something with this, and we'll try this in our next store because we can do that in a limited way. Or in actual fact, for this time, we're going to ignore your insight, and that happened because we think this will trump it. And sometimes that experience trumped my numbers, right? And that was fine. That's real life, isn't it? But I think
we've got here the human judgment with the experience combined with the data. And referencing your earlier example, there's like a triangle saying the business strategy, when all of those three things are kind of operating concurrently in the same zone, you stand a chance of being able to get good results by activating your insights. If any one element is missing, you stand a chance of just having paralysis or doing analytics and stuff that goes nowhere.
Yes.
So the AI velocity piece, which started the whole conversation, sounds like how do you make AI velocity insights work? We're back to AIs again, but they wouldn't know your business strategy unless you told them. Nope. So there's a filtering mechanic that you need.
Yeah.
And then where's the human judgment? So
exactly. And I know already, I've seen it a lot in my career. I mean, like yourself, John, from a sort of marketing background as well, we've been working machine learning, for example, for donkey's years. So we understand the benefit of using the machine to wrangle a lot of data and produce models quickly and all the rest of it, right? Because you get it from a productivity perspective, it gets us to a point of being able to do something useful faster, right? Absolutely. But again, we still need to have those kind of measures in place. Governance, let's call it governance, insight governance, decision governance. I'm making stuff up now in terms of those phrases. I'm making a new sector, but we need these things in place for making sure that what we are, even where we are using AI, it's focused on the right strategy. It's focused on what matters, because we know we've got to make trade-offs. Finite resources are finite. We can't solve for everything at once. So even the way we use AI has to be cognizant and reflective of that fact, I think. And certainly where the insights are strategically imperative to the point of sometimes being existential, we absolutely need people on top of them. And that kind of forum we're talking about, where people are actually trading the stories of the business in order to kind of chart a new way forward, is kind of vital. The one thing I probably would say about dealing with the kind of the AI driven insights is that there is an absolutely important case to kind of invest in what I'd call last mile execution. So, but that depends on the type of insights. So I'm thinking about, insights that are embedded in workflows, for example. That does make life easier. And there are local insights that can move faster and be to a certain degree automated, like around CRM campaigns and so on, where the boundaries are not so existentially, big that we're going to cause ourselves enormous problems. So I do think there's a place, and there's no going back. I don't think organizations will stop using AI and go, hang on, we're not organizationally ready. It's just not the way this works. But we have to, I think the effort needs to be made in sort of transforming ourselves to be organizationally ready. And some of that is making sure that we, as I mentioned before, we anchor everything in business outcomes. We make sure that there's forums for people to be able to absolutely kind of culturally come together, and because fundamentally they are going to make the decisions. So they have to be front and center of this. There needs to be a way forward for that. Part of that is, I think, is about building that decision literacy, making sure that people are, comfortable and understand how we make decisions in an organization and what that looks like, who has the rights to make decisions, what are the implications of making decisions, giving people the kind of psychological safety to experiment, all these things. And we reward evidence-driven decisions, we celebrate the successes, all that kind of good stuff that comes with good literacy. You tell I'm avoiding the word data literacy here. I'm talking about decision literacy purposely. But yeah, there's a lot to be done. But I think the train is already running with AI, clearly. The new analytics tools and tech are throwing insight at us, right? It's about how we as organizations kind of meet that and start to build ourselves, become ready for it. And there's a lot of work to be done, to be fair, but it's it's a good problem.
I mean, I've been reflecting on the use of the word trade-offs, and the decision literacy idea. So this is, again, once you've got this insight, it all goes in. The insight itself was analytically driven, hopefully, somewhere along the line, and you've got this second wave of how can we qualify if it will be a good thing to do. So I think of it as the business case and rollout potential. How certain are we? Certainty, and how do we use data to kind of ultimately. It's a bit like the case where you said, you pitched, used to pitch your work with the director team or something, and they would go, "Yeah, James, I believe it." So something you have done is persuaded them that it's impactful enough, big enough, scale, is going to make a difference to them. So there's this gap too from we have this good idea or this insight. It's then this kind of it can't all just be, there's a load of revenue if we do this, because it's actually back to cross-functional. It consumes 72 people. If we want to try and act on it, we've got to rip up that bit of rule book over there. There's all these things in the trade-off that are a bit scary to get through and build on. So there's this whole, I don't know what it is, just it's there, and it's a thing that is required to do something.
It is, John. It's all about trade-offs. I mean, that's the world I work in now, actually. Focused on data strategy, is the fact, and this all fits within the wider data strategy angle anyway, because insights is kind of the getting towards the last mile of using data to make a decision, right? It's all part of one chain. It is about trade-offs, because the first data strategies I was involved with were big bang attempts of huge transformation. Try and fix everything at once, right? And we all know that doesn't work. We've got finite resources. We've got to do more with less, most organizations. So there's a lot of push and pull factors going on, right? So we've got AI and technology change, but fewer resources. And we've got to do things faster. We've got to create value and so on. So that means we've got to make the right decisions focused on the right outcomes. And that places a sort of dependency on data in general that says we have to be absolutely focused on what our mission critical data is in our organization. What is the data that we need to drive the change that we hope to see, or the value we hope to see for our stakeholders in our organization? Is that data fit for purpose? Does it have the quality we need? Is this something we need to do? And I think this is all fundamentally about taking a much leaner route to this and much more laser focused on because we only got finite resources, we say, and the point here is that every decision costs us something, and it requires investment. Now that cost could be the fact that, in actual fact, this is quite significant. It'd be technology we need to make to provision that decision, or more people, or more processes, or just more people's time, for example. Like you said, that's 72 persons hours, but that's going to be worthwhile. Or there's an opportunity cost to everything as well, right? There's something else we could have made. So for me, all of it has always been about being very clear about what are the outcomes in our organization, the value we're creating for our stakeholders today and tomorrow. Some of it is future value. What's the data that we need to get there? What are the decisions that we need to make? Because those decisions, understanding the decisions we need to make, places a dependency on the insights, where we look for insights, and the effort we put in on that data. So you can't look at it. It's all part of one chain, basically. I've always seen it like that. But I think more and more so, we need to be much leaner and focused, because we need to invest more effectively. And professionally, us data folks need to show return on investment. We need to show that we are getting more bang for the buck. CDOs are still going. They're still an important thing, but they're certainly not given the blank checks they used to get, right? So we need to make sure that our kind of insight functions really are kind of focused on the right things.
Yeah, I mean, look, history says so. We remember the big data era, which was about we'll gather all data in the hope that there's something transformative. So it wasn't about narrow data and these ROI case that you said to make sure we keep our jobs. It was like, we believe there's something in this data. We put in place platforms that gather absolutely everything, ask the data a lot to search for needles in the haystack. But because it was never really business driven, it was exploratory. It never really delivered on its promise.
It hasn't, and that's the world. That is the world we live in now. You say, John, there are huge pressures on organisations and businesses to deliver results, right? And that means that all of us need to be working closer together as one business, focused on the right decisions. One thing I would say, and I think I mentioned it before, is that I do, though, as a data leader, I absolutely believe what I just said. By the way, I'm not going to go back on it. I'm not just saying it. So
flip-flops.
No, that's right. Here we go. It's the controversial point. No, it's the I love a moment of serendipity, right? Because a lot of the best insights I've ever seen have come from someone who's done a bit of off the side of the desk exploration somewhere, or they followed a hunch. So I think the way that we structure our teams and what have you, I think we need to leave a little bit of latitude for some of that fun to happen. Because in actual fact, some of the good stuff that we would just never expected that really changes the business actually is just serendipity at work in many ways, because we followed a hunch. So I'm a little bit, there's some rough edges around my approach, to be fair, but I think you need a little bit of both, don't you?
We do. Well, look, let's add that to the list. James, let's try and recap this. It's been a great conversation. Thank you for that. Let's try. What are all the important things that we've said? Let me challenge you. What have we said today? So what are all the things, folk, like if we were listing like things that you need to think about when you're taking care of your insights? I'll do the easy ones. So, you said it must be business driven and wholly aligned to business goals. I heard, management engagement, and or receiving, human judgment from an expert is like a key element. What else did we say?
So we need all that. I think we need to definitely think about what I would call a decision-making infrastructure, architecture, whatever you want to call it. That's going to depend on your organization, but that's been really clear about how decisions are made in your organization. Where your data comes from. Is it fit for purpose? We already mentioned, is it, as it aligns business outcomes, but, are you clear about what data, what insights can be automated? What needs to go for more of that panel approach we discussed, that more kind of strategic review? Who's got the decision rights? Who's got the ownership? What the escalation paths? All of that falls within infrastructure. So I think that's absolutely key. I think we need to pay attention just to our kind of cultural readiness to this. So, how in actual fact, how siloed are we? Right? That tends to be a big problem. Are we actually rewarding evidence-based kind of decision making? Are we encouraging curiosity? So I think those things are key as well. And then that kind of whole aspect, I think, which falls into that, is about kind of creating the environment for, I would say, better decision literacy. So the psychological safety to make decisions, and sometimes the decisions are not right, but not worrying too much about that necessarily, because we need to fail sometimes, right, to improve. Again, that creating a place where people kind of can make, can feel like they can make decisions. They're not trying to be heroes the whole time, right? They're working as one team. There's a lot there in terms of kind of creating the kind of cultural environment that means we're ready for this.
Thanks for taking us through all that. My takeaway there is at least half of what you just said is like people-based towards getting this done. So it never gets old, does it? Collaboration, so on and so forth is the key element to it. So, James, we've hit time. It's been a fantastic interview. Thanks for taking us through it all. Ladies and gents, this was ML's Like Team Spirit.